I know in the last episode I said that I was going to do an episode on international queer history.
But after the death of Larry Kramer yesterday, May 27, 2020,
I thought it'd be best to honor him by talking about his story and his work. While Larry Kramer started his work as a playwright, writing stories about love and gay culture, what truly makes him a hero to the LGBT community was his work during the HIV/AIDS epidemic. When faced with the disease, noticing that no one in power was paying attention, Kramer got angry, and he used that anger to make real change. I'm Alexis Arrington, and welcome to this episode of Everyone's Gay, a look in queer history. Larry Kramer was the youngest of three children born to a struggling family during the Great Depression. Because he was the youngest, he was viewed by his parents as the unwanted child, because of the financial burden he carried, and thus his father wanted him to marry a wealthy woman. In 1953, he enrolled at Yale University, where he felt lonely and struggled in school. He attempted suicide because he felt like he was the only gay student on campus. And because of his experience, he was determined to explore his sexuality and fight for gay people's worth. He graduated from Yale in 1957 with a degree in English and began writing plays that reflected his life. His earliest work was a broader approach to love and was less focused on the homosexual experience, but rather straight storylines. These works included Here We Go Around the Mulberry Bush, a comedy focused on teenagers and the role of sex, Women in Love, which explores the nature of commitment and love by following two sisters and their respective male partners, and lastly, Lost Horizon, which Kramer was not proud of. After these experiences, Kramer began to integrate homosexual themes into his work. His most famous was the novel Faggots. It was a satirical portrayal of the 1970s New York visible gay community. He displays the fast lifestyle of gay men on Fire Island in Manhattan, with the primary character, a man who is unable to find love while encountering drugs and emotionless sex, is modeled after Kramer himself. The novel created great controversy around the community. When asked about the novel, Kramer stated in an interview with The New Yorker that the straight world thought I was repulsive, and the gay world treated me like a traitor. People would literally turn their backs when I walked by. You know what my real crime was? I put the truth in writing. Despite the public's reaction, Faggots became the best-selling gay novel of all time.
before AIDS, Kramer had no intention of becoming politically active. He simply wanted to write his stories and figure out his life. But when his friends began getting sick and dropping dead, he was left with no choice but to become involved in the gay rights movement. In 1981, Kramer invited a large group of well-known gay men to his apartment in New York to listen to a doctor talk about the new disease, known in 1981 as gay cancer. In January of 1982, the Gay Men's Health Crisis was founded by Paul Popham, Nathan Fain, Paul Rapport, Larry Kramer, Lawrence Mass, and Edmund White, with the mission of raising funds and providing services for people stricken with, in 1982, was called GRID, or Gay-Related Immune Deficiency. And today, we know it's AIDS. Although Kramer was a founding member and served on its first board of directors, his views on how the gay men's health crisis should be run was sharply conflicting with those of the rest of the members. The organization wanted to and began to concentrate on social services for the men who were dying, while Kramer loudly believed and insisted they fight for funding from the city and government. New York Mayor Ed Koch became a target for Kramer as he demanded funding. Another target was the gay community itself and the behavior of constant drugs, sex, and ignoring what was happening. When doctors at the CDC suggested men stop having sex, Kramer encouraged the gay men's health crisis to deliver the message to as many men as possible. When they refused, he wrote and printed an essay called 1112 and Counting. He wrote, "If this article doesn't scare the shit out of you, we're in real trouble.
If this article doesn't rouse you to anger, fury, rage, and action, gay men may have no future on this earth. Our continued existence depends on just how angry you can get.
And Kramer, he got angry. He got really, really angry. And his confrontational style proved to be an advantage, earning the issue of AIDS in New York national media attention that no other individual could get. But ultimately, it was deemed too militant for the gay man's health crisis, and in 1983, only a year after its creation, he was ousted from the organization. After being kicked out of the gay men's health crisis, Kramer was saddened and angered and expressed himself the only way he knew how, through writing. And what he wrote was the largely autobiographical play, The Normal Heart, which focuses on the rise of HIV/AIDS in New York City, and is set between 1981 and 1984.
The story follows a writer and founder of an unnamed organization dedicated to advocacy work named Ned Weeks, and is based off Larry Kramer. It looks at the organization, based on the gay man's health crisis, as Ned elects Bruce Niels as president. Bruce, in real life known as Paul Popham, is described as the good cop of activism, and the direct opposite of Ned, who is confrontational and favors direct action. Running parallel to the activism of Ned Weeks in the organization is the love story between Ned and the New York Times writer Felix Turner, and we see Felix grow sick from the disease and eventually dies, which Ned blames himself for as he feels as if he did not fight hard enough.
The play itself is considered a literary landmark, as it speaks about the disease affecting gay men that very few were speaking of at the time, and has been adapted to many on-screen portrayals, which I encourage you to watch. In 1987, Kramer used his militant style to help create a new organization, this time called the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, or ACT UP. It was a direct action protest organization that targeted government agencies and corporations for their lack of treatment and funding for people with AIDS. Their first target was the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, which Kramer accused of neglecting medication for HIV-infected Americans. On October 11, 1988, ACT UP had one of its most successful demonstrations when it successfully shut down the FDA for a day. The media reported that it was the largest demonstration since those against the Vietnam War, as the activists blocked doors, walkways, and roads that the FDA workers could not report to work. Here's some video coverage of that day.
Today's demonstration is the latest of many staged by the militant group ACT UP.
Where's the FDA? Why don't you know? That's for me. Where's the FDA? Say for me, where was the FDA? 42,000 Act up, fight back, fight AIDS. Act up, fight back, fight AIDS.
By doing this, the activists demonstrated their knowledge of the FDA drug approval processes and demanded that they be changed so experimental drugs could be offered more quickly. Authorities arrested at least 120 protesters, although demonstration leaders said they were aiming for around 300. Civil disobedience and arrest were the primary objective, as it could bring attention to the target. Kramer was arrested dozens of times working with ACT UP, as the organization became a worldwide force. Another target of ACT UP was Senator Jesse Helms, and on September 5, 1991, his home in Washington, D.C. became a target as well, when a 15-foot giant condom was placed over his house.
Capitol, more gay rights groups are speaking out, this time with a message of safety. A demonstration by members of the AIDS group ACT UP, known for disruptive protests designed to draw attention to the spread of AIDS. But this morning, something most incredible. They unfurled a giant political message for Senator Jesse Helms. The means for the message, a 15-foot giant condom, which engulfed his Washington, D.C. home.
It was a symbol of protest to his ongoing oppression of people with AIDS, which including opposing AIDS funding and homophobic statements about HIV and AIDS. The condom was inflated, and the message on it read,
"A condom to stop unsafe politics. Helms is deadlier than a virus."
And while the police were called, no one was arrested, although they did receive a parking ticket. From die-ins to 15-foot condoms to militant protests, ACT UP and the work of Larry Kramer got the attention of the people in charge. The protests helped persuade the FDA to speed the approval process for new drugs and to lower prices of AZT, along with bringing public and governmental attention to what was happening. While they fought constantly, Dr. Anthony Fauci stated that in American medicine, there are two eras, before Larry and after Larry. Throughout his activist work, he continued to write and produce many works, including Just Say No, a play about farce, which highlights the sexual hypocrisy of Reagan and Koch administrations that allowed AIDS to become an epidemic. Reports from the Holocaust, The Making of an AIDS Activist, which contains a collection of nonfiction writings by Kramer. The Destiny of Me, which picks up where the Normal Heart left off. Tragedy of Today's Gays, which was originally a call to arms speech that Kramer delivered 5 days after Bush's re-election in 2004, and was turned into a book. The American People, A History, in which he tries to add gays back into history, and in which he claims that Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Andrew Jackson, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, Mark Twain, Herman Melville, and Richard Nixon were all gay. His last work went unfinished. As this year, in response to COVID-19, Kramer began to write a play entitled An Army of Lovers Must Not Die. In 2013, Kramer married his longtime partner, David Webster. They had been together from 1991 until Kramer's death, although they had also had a relationship in the 1970s, which Webster had ended and inspired Kramer to write Faggots. Kramer died yesterday, May 27, 2020, at the age of 84 from pneumonia. He left a great legacy behind him as his militant style and anger truly changed and helped save the community that the government ignored. There are many resources to learn more about Larry Kramer and his work with the gay men's health crisis and ACT UP. One way is to read one of his many books and plays. Like I explained, much of his work is autobiographical, so you will be able to see an important insight into his life by reading his work. In particular, I recommend reading or watching the play A Normal Heart. There was an HBO-produced film directed by Ryan Murphy, released in 2014, that has a fantastic cast. I also recommend the documentary United in Anger, A History of ACT UP, which captures the efforts of ACT UP and includes several actions, including seize control of the FDA, stop the church, and Day of Desperation. Lastly, I just want to say thank you, Larry Kramer. Rest in peace. I'm Alexis Arrington, and thank you for watching this episode of Everyone's Gay.